Hello again, Samy Abdunnur again. Today our subject is coffee. You wouldn't imagine that coffee is a huge cultural corruption. You would think it's a simple thing, but it actually is one among many huge corruptions of our Islamic culture. The word is Arabic, as is the plant itself, as well as the drink, but this is not the drink. What we now consider to be coffee, which is the sort of charcoal roasted bean, was originally an herb, a very essential part of Arab culture, and it was taken only green. Arabs would not drink coffee except green, and they still do not. Arabic coffee, which is the original coffee, is the green bean. Of course, it has much more nutritional value. You don't lose any of its nutritional value when it's green. You lose most of it the way people drink it now. But why is that? It's all about misappropriation of someone else's culture. Coffee in Arabic does not mean, or did not mean, a tree or a plant. The word itself means any appetizer suppressant. Anything that suppresses your appetite in Arabic is a coffee. Qahwa in Arabic, or qahwi, from which the English or all the other languages of the world have corrupted the name coffee. It's pronounced qahwa or qahwi in Arabic. This means anything that suppresses your appetite. And since, of course, it didn't, as I said, it didn't mean a tree or a bean or anything that it means now. But since the word is Arabic and the plant itself is from Arabia, is an Arabic plant, even if it were planted in East Africa, the Arabs planted it there, or they found it there. Irrespective, it is completely, no one ever drank this bean or used it or domesticated the plant in any way before the Arabs, and it was exclusively an Arab plant until the 16th century. Now what happened in the 16th century for the rest of the world to drink coffee, and why and how was it corrupted? What happened was the Turks. The Turks are not Arab, neither were they Muslim, and they are not from Arabia, and they have nothing to do with Arab Islamic culture except that they were bought slaves. The Arabs bought them from their parents in Central Asia, where the Mongol tribes are. So they're part of that geography, that culture, and they used to sell their children to the Arabs. And the Arabs, in their tradition, part of being a good Arab was to emancipate your slaves. So they would educate them after their parents sold them and set them free. These people took over rule of this Arab Islamic empire, and they destroyed all of it gradually. Today it's how they destroyed coffee. So as the word in Arabic meant an appetizer suppressant, and these people did not know Arabic, what happened in the 16th century was that these Mongols took control, these Mongol Turks, of this empire, and they don't know the language or the culture. And the Arabs used to drink wine as an appetizer suppressant, not like Europeans do now with food. They used to drink it warm, like a type of tea. So they called it coffee. Now these Turks don't know Arabic, they don't know anything about the culture, so they prohibited coffee when they took control, because the word in Arabic came to mean wine, and they prohibited that through more than one century. By the 16th century, the Europeans had got to know coffee. Of course, the prohibition was on and off. It didn't work because coffee is an essential part of Arab culture, and they couldn't suppress it, couldn't forbid it, and it spread over the empire, and wherever the Arabs had reached, including Spain, in Europe, Portugal, Spain, southern France, wherever there were Arabs, there's coffee, and Istanbul itself, where the Turks were in control. The Europeans learned of coffee through Istanbul, so the Europeans got in contact with coffee during Turkish rule of the Arab Islamic Empire, and to them the word meant something like a sedative, some sort of an alcoholic beverage. They considered it must be the Arab equivalent of wine, some sort of a sedative, so they prohibited it as well. Until Pope, around the end of the 16th century, now Turkish prohibitions of course precede that. Then come the Europeans, they get introduced to coffee. So this Pope tastes the coffee, his name was Clement, and he decided that it has no effects of wine. It's not something to replace wine. It's not the Arab equivalent of some sort of a sedative or of an alcoholic beverage. So he allowed it. Now the Europeans had already began trying to take over the world trade, which was also Arab and destroyed by the Turks like other things Arab. And there was a competition between the British and the Dutch. So they saw the commercial use of this plant. But the Arabs refused to sell it, except not as a green seed. the way it's supposed to be used, and the way Arabs still drink coffee, green coffee, because they knew that the Europeans are just going to commercialize their Arab culture. We're going to plant it and make it into some sort of a commercial profit, make a profit off of it. So they sold them the coffee roasted, well roasted. And that's how the Europeans were introduced to it, roasted coffee. And to them, it seemed there was a benefit. Commercially, roasted coffee per bean makes many more cups than green coffee does. So it makes a bigger profit. And preparing it is much easier, and it can be stored for longer periods. So they were introduced to coffee as roasted coffee, but they weren't worried about, they didn't care about the culture, they didn't care about the benefits of coffee, green coffee. It's a cumbersome process, which you will see in this video, to make green coffee, and it will be much more expensive if you do it that way. All they cared about is to commercialize it, so they wanted the plant itself. So they stole it through the Turks. The Dutch went through the Turks, and the British did it through other non-Arab Muslims. In this case, an Indian. So the British in India sent an Indian named Baba Mundane or something like that, an Indian guy, a Muslim, who was who was asked to steal the green beans during the pilgrimage season, the Hajj, and he did that from the Hijaz, and they planted it in their plantations in East Asia, in India. And the Dutch, through Turkish rulers of Yemen at the time, stole the plant itself. A Dutch merchant named, I think, Peter van der Broek or something like that, and he stole it with the help of the Turks. He stole the plant from Yemen, the tree, and they planted it in their East Asian plantations, and through them they planted it all over the world, and now they monopolized. It used to be an Arab, completely, as I said, it's essential part of Arab culture. It's in every Arab event, and you'll see how it's made originally. And they made it into the most drinkable, or the biggest beverage in the world, by selling it in its roasted, non-beneficial, at least not the way it should be, not as beneficial as it could be, form, because that's the way they first were introduced to it by the Arabs themselves. And since it came via the Turks, and the whole corruption began via the Turks, they call it Turkish coffee. Actually, it's the Turkish destruction of coffee, if you're going to call it Turkish. Salam.